This is Defenders TV Podcast, episode 187, about Daredevil Season 3, Episode 2. Grüezi, Defenders, and welcome back to Defenders TV Podcast as we cover Daredevil Season 3. We're on Episode 2, which is Episode 187 of Defenders TV Podcast. I am one of your hosts, John.
And I'm your other host for this episode, Derek. Welcome back.
Yes, welcome back. Unfortunately, we still don't have Chris. He is still unavailable. He works long hours.
Do you think he's stuck in the basement of some orphanage somewhere, maybe? Or a church?
No, probably just a high-tech firm. Chained to the desk, methinks.
Possibly.
Yes.
But he'll be back very soon for one of our later episodes on the season. We're hoping he's back for episode 3, which will be out next week.
Yes, Chris will be back for episode 3. And of course, welcome back to fellow Defenders. We're early into season 3 of Daredevil. Remember, subscribe, rate us, and leave a review. You can head on over to defenderstvpodcast.com and go to our subscribe section to join any good or evil podcast catcher of choice to listen to us. And of course, we are doing our normal spoiler-filled comment posts on our Facebook group. So head on over to facebook.com/groups/Defenders TV Podcast. Join the community, leave a comment, leave your point of view. And of course, we will call that out on our feedback section at the end of each episode. Yeah, of course, normally we don't have feedback for the first and second episode just because we get some of the episodes ahead of schedule, but it begins to ramp on up and we certainly got a good amount of feedback for Iron Fist. So we really are looking forward to all the comments coming in. You can send in your discussion points on any episode of Daredevil Season 3, also by email. Just send an email over to feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com. Or you can leave a voicemail if you want to actually join us orally on the podcast. Yes, head on over to our website, defenderstvpodcast.com. Go to the right-hand tab on the side of the screen and leave up to 90 seconds of voicemail. And of course, again, we will play that back on the podcast. So let us get into our spoiler-filled review.
Just one thing I wanted to say before we go into our spoiler-filled review. We are now on Spotify, finally. It took us about 2 years to get on Spotify. So if you listen to your music over on Spotify and want to start listening to our podcast over there rather than having two apps, you can pop in there and just search Defenders TV Podcast and you'll see our podcast pop up there every time we release an episode as well.
Excellent. Yeah. Spotify. That joins Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts as well. For your podcasting pleasure, fellow Defenders. But Derek, yes, back to the episode details. Who directed this episode of Daredevil? And why did I say Grüezi at the start of this episode?
Well, this episode was directed by Lukas, Ettlin, a man who was born and raised in our current hometown, Basel, in Switzerland. And Grüezi is how the Switzerlanders or the Baseliers greet each other.
Yes, indeed. A bit like Grüß Gott in Austria as well. So those kind of different welcomes to people that you know and people that you are there to welcome on board. So definitely, fellow Defenders, it's a big Grüezi from me again. Born in Basel, Switzerland. He's known as a cinematographer for films such as The Lincoln Lawyer and Battle Los Angeles.
That's right. Yes. He's done some cinematography on some quite major films. Yeah, and he's also directed episodes of Black Sails, Shooter, Power, and recently worked on the sci-fi show Krypton, which is the history of the Kryptonians before their planet exploded. So kind of cool that he's been working on that as well.
Excellent. Yeah, so he certainly knows his way around a comic book property.
Absolutely. Welcome aboard, Lukas. First episode of a Marvel show that you've directed. Hopefully we see some more of it in the future. The episode was written by Jim Dunn, mostly recently worked on a show called Hand of God for Amazon, which stars Gareth Delahunt from Fear the Walking Dead. I know I have lots of Walking Dead friends who listen into our podcast and are big fans of Gareth Delahunt and his work on Fear the Walking Dead. So check out Hand of God and see what Jim Dunn did over there with that show, and see what Gareth Delahunt did over there too, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
And interestingly, Jim Dunn was formerly a podcaster when he first started out going and setting up his career as a screenwriter over in Hollywood. Himself and his writing partner moved from the Midwest. They were both restaurateurs and moved out to Hollywood and set up a podcast called Sam and Jim Go to Hollywood back in 2005. And it ran for about 4 years, up until 2008, with just some irregular updates after that, and closed out in 2014 was the last update, where they just stated, "We've been hired for a show and we don't know whether we're going to be able to do this podcast anymore," telling you the real behind the scenes secrets. But quite successful little venture for the two of them, now that they have gone into Hollywood and wrote loads and loads of shows.
Excellent stuff. Really good story there. Yeah.
See, there you go. I do have some good stories. But John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis for this episode?
Sure. With Vanessa at the forefront of his thoughts, Wilson Fisk makes his deal with the FBI, giving them intel to take down a violent Albanian crime gang in New York. But in so doing, this new snitch of Rikers Island is in danger. Attacked in the prison gym, the FBI move to protect their source and begin preparations to move him to a safe house. Meanwhile, Matt Murdock, recovering from his injuries after protecting 2 New Yorkers from muggers, continues to push back against Sister Maggie, Father Lantom, and the church. As he goes after the muggers from the previous evening, he promises to protect Hell's Kitchen in the name of Daredevil, no longer a servant of God. Elsewhere, Ellison at the New York Bulletin asks a reluctant Karen Page to investigate the police report of a mugging in Hell's Kitchen. After learning of a mass vigilante in black, she races to tell Foggy, firm in the belief that their good friend Matt Murdock is still alive. As Wilson Fisk has moved from Rikers to his new secure accommodation, the convoy is attacked by the Albanians, looking for blood. In the ensuing chaos, with all the FBI guards killed and the Albanians closing in on him, a sole surviving FBI agent with a precise aim and a deadly shot manages to save Wilson Fisk.
A very precise aim on that FBI agent.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Great scene, actually, yeah.
Yeah, let's get into our first case note number 1, because it's probably one of my favorite lines in the episode, as we hear Ray describe to District DA why he needs Wilson Fisk out of prison with the line, "Tonight, the town of New York is safer because of Wilson Fisk." Ooh, I love the response from the police chief afterwards, who goes, "Now I want to throw up."
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a really interesting turnaround. I mean, you know, Wilson Fisk has this monologue really as he's being transported to this new safe accommodation after he has done this deal, which makes New York safer. You know, he's offering up the other gangs of New York, and he's started with the Albanians. And, you know, it's cost no loss of life. It's taken down some corrupt public officials, and they have the accounts where they can follow the money. But it's really interesting, you know, that he's doing this because of Vanessa. He wants to protect her. I'm only doing a deal with you so that I can save her. And there's a great monologue as he's being transported, where he talks about love being the prison, because you can never escape it once you've fallen in love. And that any prison, any secure accommodation for anyone determined enough, you know, you can escape from. So really, really nicely done. But I mean, coming back to it, ultimately, the DA, Blake Tower, who's back again, which is really nice to see, is kind of there with, I think, the chief of police.
Yeah,
for New York. And yeah, I think the chief of police probably does throw up in his mouth or something after getting this spiel from Ray Nadeem. And again, You know, you could listen to Ray Nadeem talking to them, persuading them that Wilson Fisk needs to be taken out of Rikers Island and taken to a kind of almost like a witness protection program type setting, more secure accommodation, but ultimately out of prison. You could read this kind of either way, I think, with Ray Nadeem. He's certainly advocating here for Wilson Fisk, which is really interesting. And he's certainly persuaded his boss that he should also continue to be the point of contact with Wilson Fisk. Because after all the Albanians have been arrested in that swoop, it looks like this whole operation is going to get moved to 2 other FBI agents. So Ray Nadeem is very good at persuading people. He's certainly advocating for Wilson Fisk here. Again, it could all be above board. Who knows? But it's really nice and juicy that you can read it both ways, I think.
Yeah, I think there's just that moment early on when there's a suggestion that possibly Ray won't be the one that leads up this case, that possibly his boss is going to hand it off to 2 other agents and has them in her office, that he kind of runs in and kind of swats them out of the way and goes, this is my deal. It's because of my relationship that I built up with Fisk. Nobody else got it from him in the past, which isn't necessarily true. This whole thing has come about, as you mentioned, and as Wilson Fisk mentions in his speech, the whole thing has come about is because somebody's putting pressure on Vanessa, because the FBI have been putting pressure on Vanessa. It had absolutely nothing to do with Ray's relationship at all. Ray walked in and was told within a couple of seconds, I'm ready to do a deal. So what we don't see, the bits that we don't see and the bits that are in the corners and the pieces that we're trying to work out, is there something there with Ray? Is it possible that this is just Ray's ambition to get himself a good name in the FBI? Or has he done a deal with Fisk that would allow Fisk to get out of prison? Was the attack on Fisk arranged? The one that was in the weights room where the guy comes up behind him. Fisk obviously knows him because he allows him to spot while he's doing his weightlifting. And then the guy shivs him once and Fisk turns on him. And you're wondering, did Fisk set all this up so he can actually get his own way out of prison? The Albanians attack the van. He does look quite scared in the van. One moment that I really love, which shows Fisk's real strength as well as he pulls his handcuffs out of the floor of the car.
That was really good.
Like they're supposed to be there so that nobody can pull it out of the floor, but Fisk is able to do it, just showing his strength. So nice little nod to his comic book power, I suppose. But
definitely. And I mean, certainly I think Fisk is playing the angle. He's working this situation as well, not in terms of his feelings for Vanessa, but certainly he is making the most of the attack on him in the gym to kind of try and get some kind of better position. And that is to get himself out of prison, because it is that what next step to freedom for him. And again, it comes back to that monologue that he talks about love being the ultimate prison. He says any determined man can escape prison, as he's being driven by the FBI out of prison to a kind of witness protection program. So it's immediately changed his situation for the better. So I definitely think he's working the situation there. And, you know, he is that target in these walls. He's really trying to get that aspect honed into the FBI so that he can get this release ultimately. So I really enjoyed seeing him play that angle, basically. And again, it is, to what extent is Ray involved with that playing of the angle? Mm-hmm. But I do think the attack by the Albanians was absolutely genuine. I don't think that was necessarily set up by him.
Right.
I don't get that sense anyway, but maybe he has. Maybe it is that well thought out and planned, potentially. So I really enjoyed that.
You just don't know with Fisk, and as you say, because he's eulogizing and giving one of his wonderful speeches in the back of a police van, which he did back at the end of season 1 before he did the flip into becoming Kingpin as opposed to Wilson Fisk. That's what makes you think that he's got all of this situation under his control.
Yeah, definitely.
I love that moment as well that Ray talks about the lawyer again. He mentions Ben Donovan almost ruining the whole deal for Wilson Fisk because of this huge book of rules and regulations that he's put together to do the deal with Wilson Fisk. It's just, once again, you know, if you've got Ben Donovan in your corner, he's going to protect you completely and totally as long as you pay his bills.
Absolutely. I think it was really nice as well when Ray Nadeem comes in and says to his boss, he goes, Fisk is my kill. I want to feed first on it. Like, really, really good. But again, some more interesting kind of comments that can be looked at either way, where he goes, there was an unexpected and special relationship between Ray and Fisk, between me and Wilson Fisk. Is that like a special relationship as in he pays you and you become solvent again? And, are you actually in his employ? Again, I really like that grey area with Ray Nadeem, and even just knowing how good Wilson Fisk is at planning stuff out. It's just nice to think that he is pulling levers, twirling knobs and all that kind of stuff to get himself into a better position to ultimately free himself from prison and custody in general.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that final scene as well, because as it stands in this episode, the end of episode 2, we don't even know if Ray makes it to episode 3 at the moment. Ray Nadeem is in the front of the car. He's taken the blast of the explosion. We see the car is completely bulletproof because there is that fantastic moment as the Albanians start to approach the car and shoot 6 bullets into the window while Fisk is looking at it and none of them penetrate. I love that moment that you see how strong the car is. But before Wilson Fisk gets out of the car, he does call for Officer Nadeem from the front seat, and you don't hear any response at all. So
no, you just see him suspended, still strapped into the seat upside down. So Ray Nadeem, maybe all this speculation from us is for naught, but I think he's just kind of been concussed and knocked out from the blast that has upturned the car. It's a great little scene seeing all the gunfight outside from Wilson Fisk's point of view, because it is totally from his perspective. You see all the FBI officers being taken down, and then gradually from the smoke, these other armed characters coming towards them. They're firing guns at the car. It doesn't work. Next thing, they've got a rotary saw going, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they are getting taken out by this kind of lone gunman walking up. And he is wearing an FBI kind of special agent outfit or body armor. He definitely looks like an official member of the FBI, but he is very good with his gun, and he's also very good with knives as well. He certainly likes to hit the mark, shall we say.
And we're going to leave our speculation right there on who that character is. We're going to call him Mysterious FBI Agent. We do know who he is, obviously, because the announcement was made before the show aired, but we know some of you don't like to be spoiled on these things. And if you're watching along, at this point, we don't know who the character is as per the show itself, right? So Mysterious FBI Agent, put a pin in that one. Hopefully when Chris comes back, we'll have a discussion about who that character could possibly be, right? But it is a cool scene. It's just a moment of like a Wild West showdown. He's like this guy coming out of the darkness, just taking out everybody all around them, Really cool.
I think as well, there were two kind of fairly comedy moments as well that bookended this episode around Wilson Fisk being released from Rikers Island and that deal. The first one, or the one at the end of the episode, is really where, the Albanians have been struggling to open up this car, and then Wilson Fisk just seems to kick open the door. Yeah. And it's like, did they just not check that it was unlocked and they could have used the handle?
It's like he taps it and it just falls off.
I thought that was really funny. Or is it
just his strength again? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it was just really funny. And the other one was definitely the comedy hands up moment at the start where the FBI are rushing into the Albanians, kind of the head guy's house, and they go hands up to the maid who's carrying a tray of plates and mugs. And of course it smashes in a fantastically kind of Laurel and Hardy-esque way to the floor. So I really liked that. I mean, it was a bit silly, but it was kind of bookended by two kind of silly notes, really. But Yeah, I thought it was really funny.
That's good. That's good.
I have a silly sense of humor.
I like it. That's when they arrested Mother Teresa at the start, isn't it? Which has to be the worst name for a crime boss for the poor guy, like going into meetings going, Mother Teresa, would you like to speak? But he does have a tattoo over on his back, so I suppose.
Yeah.
But let's leave that for this episode. We'll talk about Wilson Fisk again, I'm sure, next episode. Let's get on to case note number 2. When you can't fulfill your calling, where does that leave you? We have Matt having this discussion again with Sister Maggie when he's returned from his first night out as a vigilante daredevil once again. He has this moment with her where he's saying that he's lost all faith in God because he can no longer be an instrument of God. The whole concept for him was, that he thought he was a soldier of God. He thought he was receiving instructions from God in some way, some messages from God in some way to go out and do his will and his bidding. And now he realizes that's not what he's able to do anymore. And that's not what he's out there to do anymore. So he feels like he's lost everything.
Yeah, I mean, I do like Sister Maggie's sort of opener to Matt Murdock, where she goes, I've got a super power as well. I'm impervious to bad attitudes, as he's sort of giving out about God, the church, Jesus, or you name it. It's been written down in the list of bad things that Matt Murdock has, really. But I think, again, it's another really good interaction between these two characters where we hear Sister Maggie talks about, the meandering path that she's had to go on as well, that she has lost her faith too. She had to leave the order, but she came back to it. This kind of winding route that she has taken with her own relationship with the church, with God, and she's kind of suggesting to Matt Murdock here that maybe this is this moment where you are having that separation, but you will come back to him. And I really like that. I mean, and certainly because I think for Sister Maggie, you kind of ask the question, well, what made you leave the order? And there could be a few things here that would link to the comics and to Daredevil in particular that could be part of that. And I think that's a really nice, intriguing element to their conversations. It's a bit like with Ray Nadeem and Wilson Fisk. You're trying to say, what is the precise relationship going on here between these two characters? And the thing is, the dialogue and the acting between these two characters in those scenes with just the two of them. I really enjoyed this conversation where she kind of says, you're not the only one that has these issues or has gone through these things for different reasons. Absolutely. But you're not the only one, get off your bad attitude.
Well, I know, yeah, but I do really like how Matt is teasing this stuff out. We see it in the flashback when Matt's a kid. We hear from Father Lantom that he's a person that always likes to challenge what's going on in the status quo. He's someone that challenged when a sister had the audacity to try to explain to him what original sin is. And Matt just targeted her until he was kicked out of her office.
Yeah.
You hear that back in the day, and you also hear a little bit of this with Sister Maggie as well, where he kind of goes to her, well, if you felt that you couldn't do your calling as a nun, well, what would you do? Would you not lose faith in God completely? And she goes, well, I'd go off and find something else that I could do and could fulfill my life as well. And he goes, well, then it wasn't a true calling, was it? Kind of like a, haha, gotcha. The lawyer in Matt is coming back out again, this thing of probing until his witness, this person, Sister Maggie, is giving up and doing the things and saying the things that he wants her to say, at really nice moments with her.
And it also links into those flashbacks with the younger Daredevil as well, where, Father Lantom says, there is a difference between argumentation versus being argumentative. It really shows that there is anger there. And again, with the original sin conversation, you see where Matt Murdock ultimately followed that legal route with his career.
Yeah.
But it came from a place of being argumentative. I really like the moment as well where young Matt Murdock is twirling his stick and just... he knows that Sister Maggie can't pin these beatings of the older kids on him because, as Father Lantom says, who's going to tell anyone, who's going to admit that they were beaten up by a blind kid? So yeah, I really like these moments between these two characters and with Father Lantom. And certainly I think, the two of these characters really give as good as they get. Again, Daredevil, as you said, coming back at Sister Maggie saying, well, would you have given up being a nun? You know, it's a real nice touch that it's kind of like this incessant argumentation between the two of them that they just won't give it up.
Yeah.
I wonder where he got that from.
Exactly. And I do wonder, are they saying something about how Matt has been treated by the people around him after his father died? Like, his father wasn't great to him. Obviously, his father was a boxer and went into some criminality, as we heard in the first season. But when his father was killed, he was passed on to the orphanage. And it feels like from then on, he did have people that supported him. Father Lantom is probably as close to giving him a little bit of a way out at times by saying, you know, losing your sight was the worst thing that could possibly happen. But then he had Sister Maggie to deal with, and then he had Stick to deal with. People who don't respect him, or at least don't treat him with kid gloves all the time, you know, because of what he's gone through. They treat him like anybody else, or they even push him further than they would with anybody else so that he doesn't fall into that trap of self-pity. This is what Sister Maggie's trying to do to him in these discussions. She's trying to make sure that he's not just falling into this vat of self-pity, but he has that moment going, wouldn't you grieve if you lost the only ability that you knew you had? And she goes, yes. And he goes, well, then leave me alone. Let me grieve. And when I've done grieving, I'll then choose my path, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Really, really good. I think with that, on to case note number 3. Karen gets a new story. Yes. Poor old Mitchell Ellison is having to persuade Karen to take a story that she is going to look at and investigate. I think it's a real nice moment where he goes, it's one thing to run a story, it's another to let the story run you. And he's kind of referring to here her obsession with Midland Circle, and certainly trying to find what exactly happened and whether there's any trace of Matt still alive underneath all the rubble. So it's a really nice moment. It's great to see Mitch Ellison back as well.
Yeah.
I really like this guy as the editor-in-chief of the New York Bulletin. I think, you know, it's that real nice familiarity of a boss and his employee that get along. He knows what she's like. She knows what he's like. And ultimately it comes to the point where he says, look, just run with this story. You know, I've picked this because I thought you could do a good job on it. And reluctantly, Karen goes to look at this story involving the father and daughter that was saved by Daredevil.
Yeah. And it is interesting, isn't it? There's a little dropped line from Ellison about the fact that she has done many stories about Midland Circle. I'm kind of glad they had the drop line in there because this kind of scene with Karen has been used quite a few times where she just ignores what the editor-in-chief of the newspaper is saying and wants to pursue her own stories. But he does make the comment that the stories she's done about Midland Circle have been brilliant. They've been some of the best written stories. And he goes, and I'm actually jealous of the writing that you've done on them. They're really good, but you need to take a break from them, is what he's saying to her. So I'm glad they did have a little bit of a dropped line in there. I do wish sometimes we'd get a moment with Karen writing a good story, which is a story given to her by the editor of the newspaper, the person that she works for, the person who's had, 10, 15, 20 years in the business and should know the newspaper very well, as opposed to Karen just walking in one day and going, I'm now a newspaper reporter, which is what it seemed like at times. But he is saying that she does do good work and he is very jealous of her writing. So at least we have a little bit of confirmation that she is a good newspaper reporter now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I do like the way that Karen, when she goes to the hospital, so the two people involved in that mugging, and who were saved by Daredevil is, Mr. Kazemi, and who's a wealthy realtor with, his daughter Nida, who really doesn't want anything to do with Karen. I like how she gets her to open up to Karen, to really let her in to tell the story. And I mean, ultimately, that story involves Karen hearing of this kind of masked vigilante in black, and immediately her thoughts go to Daredevil. But I think just rewinding a bit on that, I really like the comparison that Karen does with Nida, the girl who's in hospital waiting on her father to recover. She doesn't want to talk to Karen because she sees Karen as the paparazzi, that the story will be made up anyway. And Karen kind of confirms this. She says, if you don't speak to me, then another newspaper will simply run with some kind of lie. And through that, we get this reveal and a bit of a backstory of Karen about her hometown, a small town where they all believed that she killed her brother. And it wasn't true, but it snowballed into that lie, into that myth of Karen. And she makes that connection between the paparazzi doing that in the middle of New York, making up stories that make no sense, and small town, close community, everyone knows everyone else, but they're not sure of all the facts and run with their own story in the head that then just snowballs out of control, leaving, someone to deal with having to really kind of take back the truth on that. And it feels like it's a long time since we've seen Karen do that type of delving and persuasion in order to investigate and report on a story. But I mean, ultimately, it does lead to a bigger thing here, which is she now believes that Matt Murdock is alive. And I kind of like to think that Mitchell Allison knew about this masked vigilante from the police report that came through on the wire or whatever, and that's why he put her on it. I think it kind of would be a nice thing.
Maybe. All I had in my head was possibly that he was sending Karen down there because she would be able to have this conversation with Nita, that she is someone that's gone through an experience in her past, and maybe she could be able to use that to persuade Nita to talk to the newspaper, to talk to the Bulletin. What we kind of hear from the description of the family, effectively, is that Mr. Kazemi is a very wealthy realtor, and his wife is on one of those TV shows, one of those Housewives of New York type TV shows. So she's very famous in her own right for reality TV. He's very famous because he's really wealthy in the realty business, and she's taking the brunt of it. The daughter is taking the brunt of it as because of the reality star nature of what the paparazzi are following, and she's had to deal with this all of her entire life. And she's only gone out to dinner with the father to make up the relationship again. We hear that from her as well. I like that Karen uses her backstory, uses this story that we haven't actually heard the details of at all yet. I remember back in season 1, we were so desperate to get the story of Karen that we paused the screen on a newspaper article from her hometown describing a car crash that possibly we were saying killed her brother. It was a very small article and a very small moment at the beginning of season 1, and it was referred to by all the people around as if we as the audience should know the story of Karen, but they've never delved into it. So I'm really hoping that this moment is kicking off a backstory for Karen.
Oh, me too.
Where we see a bit of her family. We hear that this story by the newspaper tore her family apart and she ran away and went to New York because of that story, which we kind of sort of knew. We knew something in her past had driven her away, but I'm really hoping that we're finally going to get something from Deborah Ann Woll, an actual backstory for her character, because it's just gone on way too long now. We're 4 years of shows featuring Karen Page talking about something that happened in her past. I want to know what it is.
Yeah, definitely. And this is a good enough start for me. So I really want to see how that plays out so that we get some real meaty backstory about Karen. I think that'd be really good. But talking of meat, and given that she has found out that a man in a black mask arrived, where does she go to? She goes to the Nelson family butchers. Case note number 4. Yes, I never knew this. Foggy has butcher lineage in him.
We should have guessed this, though, because it's mentioned in Defenders and it's mentioned in Daredevil Season 2 when the relationship starts to break down between Matt Murdock and Foggy Nelson. He says, well, I could always go back and be a butcher. That's what my parents always wanted me to be. And we just thought it was a bit of a throwaway gag, but it's not. The family are a family of butchers, and his parents have been saying, can you come back and take over this bloody business and get away from those upper class citizens of New York and get away from your law business? It's really interesting to see them back together and see that there is a real answer as to why he's being told not to be a lawyer, to be a butcher, which seems like a strange career decision. There's even that moment with his mother, which is slightly confusing still to me, where she turns around to him and says, stop using your big brain up there, use your big brain back here. And I was going, to do the butchery in there, or to do the accounts or the law firm side of it, because that won't help his dad out at all. Like I would understand if she was saying, come over and take on the business side of here, we need your help. But she's telling him that the reason that she wants him back is because his father's getting too old to do the butchery. She's telling him to leave the law firm of Hogarth, Benowitz and Chow, or just Benowitz and Chow now, to come back and work in the butchers, Which is quite an interesting thing to push to Foggy Nelson, isn't it?
Well, that's it, because I kind of thought that she was trying to persuade him to come back, obviously because his brother, it's too much for him. He's good with the butchering and doing the cuts of meat. You know, he's a skilled butcher, but other aspects of the business, he can't really do. Plus, then you see his dad, and, you know, as I say, you really saw his hand shaking as he tries to pour the red wine, and I was there going, oh, he's got Alzheimer's. But then it seemed to be that it was just that he was getting older, or was it even the wine and the drink, because he was overindulging at this party and this family reunion of the Nelsons. But certainly age is a factor for his dad here, and she wants to try and get him back to help out in some way with the family business. I thought it was a nice insight again into Foggy. I thought here it was really good to see him with his brother. I love the fact that, you know, and again, Whiskey Watch here, that they're sharing a really nice bottle of Jameson's Irish whiskey, green label Irish whiskey. I think it's either Special Reserve 18 years or it is the Special Vintage Reserve. So it was really nice. So that's the Whiskey Watch for this time. And I thought it was quite funny that, you know, his dad is sort of giving out to him for drinking this expensive red wine when he's got a really nice bottle of Irish whiskey there, and triple distilled, smooth as a cucumber, you know, so really, really good.
But I'm wondering, is that the gag from his dad where he's going, why are you buying this really expensive bottle of red wine when we have a really expensive bottle of whiskey from the home country that you can drink downstairs, you know? Is that the gag?
I think it might be.
Because he does give him a good jab for kind of bringing this bottle of wine to an old Irish dinner, effectively, you know?
So, yeah, I mean, I hope that it is, to be honest, but it could just be a quirk of fate or a quirk of the writing. But I really enjoyed this interaction with Foggy and his family, and then seeing Karen come in and go, he's alive. You know, I thought it was really, really nice, for sure. And I think just the other point is that, you know, we gave a Gritzy at the start of this episode, and there was a Sláinte in here as well, yes. Which is kind of like cheers or good health in Irish.
Exactly. So if you're out having a pint, or if you're out having a little shot of whiskey, always say Sláinte to your friends around you.
Yeah.
Before you take the drink, of course.
And they won't know what you're saying. And then you have a little story to tell them.
Exactly.
The other good one is bottoms up, of course, or down the hatch. They're the other good ones. But yes.
But not Irish.
Enough of cheers and so on. I'd love to know how you pronounce that in Irish, actually.
Sláinte?
No, bottoms up.
Sláinte. That's how we pronounce it.
Okay, grand. Right.
We don't do translations of those types of terms, John. But I love this because back in Iron Fist, I was talking about the fact that we could do the episode synopsis in Irish one time for our audience if they wanted me to write it out in Irish for them using Google Translate. And then in these episodes, we're starting to get the Irish family all saying Sláinte to each other. We see Irish flags all around Foggy Nelson's house as well. So quite cool to see that.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting in the butchers because they did have a good old string of sausages there, which definitely looked like good old Irish sausages. Mm-hmm. But certainly the kind of cured meats that look like salamis, I was thinking, they don't look quite so Irish. They're more kind of Italian delicatessen,
still a New York butchers. Remember, it's not.
Well, that is true.
Not butchers in Dublin, so they will serve other stuff.
But some black pudding or something like that. You could see that there, or white pudding.
Aye. Well, let's get away from all of the foods that we missed from Ireland, John. Yeah, there is that moment with Karen telling Foggy that she thinks that Matt is back and saying, "Wouldn't you want to know if your best friend is back?" And Foggy immediately dismissing it, saying he knows that he's dead. He knows Matt is dead. If Matt wasn't dead, Matt would have called him by now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Would he have? Because we know he wouldn't have, unfortunately. We know he said to Sister Maggie he's not going to disturb any of his friends at all. Let's get on to case note number 5. Matt makes the realization that he is Daredevil. Kind of similar to that attitude or that idea in DC Comics that Superman is Superman and Clark Kent is the Mask. Matt Murdock is making the realization that he's Daredevil and that the Matt Murdock side of his personality, the church-going lawyer, is the cover for him when he's not out protecting the streets of New York, or of Hell's Kitchen. We hear that he used to listen to people who were praying to God in the church and kind of pick up on what they were praying for, and then go out and do it as Daredevil, as the instrument of God. But now realizes that God was never involved in that. That was all his choice, all of his ideas.
Yeah, it's his abilities, and he is the one that uses them. And so we get that moment where I do kind of really like the look of Father Lantom as Matt Murdock. You know, he recounts this about listening to the prayers of others when he was a younger boy, again in a flashback, and he goes, "I'm Daredevil, not even God can stop that now." You know, Father Lantom is kind of like, oh my goodness, what have I unleashed? But he goes out to prove that now to himself in this moment where he goes to track down the attackers of the previous night because of their dry cleaning. I must say, I really enjoyed this moment. I thought it was massively hipstery. I certainly, you know, when he's sniffing the laundry van, he says, do you know of a place where it doesn't smell like this? It not like chemicals, but more organic. And he goes, "You mean like grass?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he points him to this new laundry, and then he goes in there where, you know, they say, "Yeah, we've got a new process, a new technique." It does sound massively, on the edge of laundry fashion.
Oh, yes. Yes. There's very much that feeling that they're basically washing everybody's clothes in hemp, I guess, to make them cleaner or something like that.
But I suppose it's so that your clothes smell like a cut grass or something like that. I don't know.
Yes.
Or you get high on them, maybe.
It might be that type of grass.
Something like that. So but it was really good. I mean, he kind of gets dissed by the guy behind the counter because Matt Murdock asks, as he's kind of scoping out the joint, he asks for a flyer, and the guy behind the counter is kind of, you know, he's a bit of an arse, really. He goes, "We haven't got one in Braille." But I do love Matt Murdock. He goes, "I've got seeing friends."
Yeah.
Really, really good. But ultimately, yeah, he's scoping out the joint here, to find out that it's the right place. It's connected to that laundry van that was involved in trying to kidnap Mr. Kazemi and his daughter, Nida.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It is a little touch that I think was missing. It might have just come out of the edit on episode 1. If you're going to have something as big as Matt shaking the hands of the attacker from the previous night and noticing that he's missing part of his middle finger, we probably should have seen that in episode 1, shouldn't we? So that we know that that's what he's looking for when he goes into the dry cleaners, that he has something else, some other sense, not just an impression of what this guy is, that he's chasing him down because he's looking for the guy that's missing a middle finger, you know? You want to just lay that out there, that that's what Matt's looking for when he's doing this investigation, just to let the audience in on what he's doing, basically. But I like that Matt goes in the investigation. I like that It's not all radar sensors this time. It is a bit more in detail that he's doing this kind of investigation because it is different.
Yeah, and of course this laundry is doing more than laundry. It's got tasers, it's got guns, it's kind of got a cell down there. Whether that was intended for Mr. Kazemi and his daughter, who knows? But certainly something is afoot down here. And I think the fight is really, really good.
It's cool, isn't it?
Again, just how he uses the environment, chucking stuff off the shelves into his attackers. He uses a taser.
I love that he tases the first guy that he's fighting. Yeah, I think that's a nice touch because it's not just a punch in the face to knock him out. It's straight off taser the guy as he comes down. I love that he turns off the power to get them and attract them down to the room. It's quite a good idea to get the two of them down, you know?
Definitely. I think the style of fighting here and the choreography of it all is really, really strong again, in Daredevil. Mm-hmm. And I've really enjoyed this kind of, you know, almost like a cage fight, down and dirty in the basement of the laundry.
Yep.
And ultimately, I like how it resolves both Matt's, it confirms Matt's view that, you know, I am Daredevil. God can't stop that.
Yeah.
I'm going out to do this off my own back. it is nothing to do with the faith, the belief that I thought God was involved in everything I'd done beforehand. And I think it's a really nice touch that, Matt goes back to the hospital where Nida is and tells the victim to go ID her muggers, because they're down at one of the precincts in Hell's Kitchen. Mm-hmm. And she goes, "Thank God for you." And he goes, "He didn't help you. I did," really just to emphasize that point. I thought that was really, really good.
Yeah, really important to mention it, definitely. That he has now completely separated himself out and he's going out and taking care of these things. But as Matt is leaving the hospital, he's greeted by the arrival of the FBI agents, who have all been shot up by the Albanians, as we talked about earlier on in the episode. So he overhears a police officer on the phone going, "It's an absolute storm, everything that's happened here. The police have now let Wilson Fisk escape. He's been released from prison." And you're wondering, what happened with that FBI agent with the really good shot? Has Wilson Fisk talked him into helping him out? Have the police recovered Wilson Fisk at all? Is he being transferred into that safe house at all by a different car? Or has something else happened, which I'm sure we'll see in the next episode. But certainly Matt's ears perked up completely at the idea that the person who was his greatest foe is now back on the streets again. Yeah,
well, it kind of shook him again, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was, I thought that was really good because these two are the classic adversaries, within the comics. And it's really good to see them in this series being those antagonists towards one another. You could see it in Matt Murdock's face at that moment that he has to go and do something about it. He knows the danger that Wilson Fisk is to New York, to society, and probably to his friends. And so I really enjoyed that kind of meaningful moment as it sinks into Matt Murdock that Wilson Fisk has been released from prison, or is out of prison, I should say.
Yes, exactly. Let's see what happens with that on episode 3. No major notes for this episode. Once again, just to mention that they do take a couple of panels directly from the Born Again arc. The moments where Wilson Fisk is doing his weightlifting, that's something that he does to relieve stress. In the comic books, you see it quite a lot in Born Again, where he's lifting weights just to kind of relieve that stress as well. So I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. One other note, because I checked it out and it's not actually a nod. I did think that we saw Kevin Smith's jersey in the dry cleaners. Had to pause it a few times to check it, but the number on Kevin Smith's jersey is 37 and the number on this jersey was 2. So definitely not, unfortunately.
That's a shame. That would have been a really cool reference.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd be talking about it on Fat Man and Batman for a long time.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
Any other notes for this episode, John?
No, not for me.
Well, let's get on to our final part of this episode. John, do you defend Season 3, Episode 2 of Daredevil?
I really do defend this episode of Daredevil. I give it 4 shivved lamb shanks and a black pudding out of 5. I really thought this was a strong continuation from the first episode, actually. Mm-hmm. It really felt like these could have just been stitched together and it would have worked really well as a single episode. If we look at it purely from that episode kind of perspective.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if you watch it one after another, straight after watching episode 1, well, then it kind of is really.
Yeah.
So I think that makes it really nice, though, because they maintain that tension, maintain that pressure between this holy trinity of characters at the orphanage. Sister Maggie. I'm definitely going to call her Maggie Smith one of these days, with Father Lantom and Matt Murdock, as he increasingly divorces himself really from his upbringing and his relationship with the church and with God. I also really enjoyed, starting to peer into Foggy Nelson and Karen Page's history, family, and other reality other than with Matt Murdock. I think in particular with Karen Page, that's really important that we get to know why she came to New York when she did. She has the potential for a really interesting backstory here, and hopefully that begins to play out in season 3. And certainly to see Foggy's family at the butcher's, really, really nice. And I love the fact that they came together in the front of his butcher's shop there as his family are having a get-together. In some ways, though, it feels a little weird in that I'm kind of like going, how come season 2 didn't focus so much on these two characters? This feels kind of more like a season 2 of Daredevil in terms of focusing more on these characters. Mm-hmm. I think because you had Elektra, because you had the Punisher, it was very much focused around those relationships with Matt Murdock and not his two closest friends of Karen Page and Foggy Nelson. So I'm really enjoying this reconnection with these characters. Mm-hmm. And again, Wilson Fisk and Ray Nadeem, like, what's going on there? Who knows? I think it might be murky. I think it might be a little bit underhand. And I think that Wilson Fisk ultimately may be one of the best strategists out there and evil guys in the Marvel Netflix universe. I really, really enjoyed that. The fighting's great. The action scenes are great. And of course, we get that tantalizing lone gunman as well at the end, who certainly has a very good aim. So yeah, really do defend this episode. Really enjoyed this episode of Daredevil.
And the next episode is just going to start with the funeral of Ray Nadeem.
Yeah.
Just because we've been talking about it in this episode. But it just proves that we haven't watched ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Derek, do you defend this episode of Daredevil?
A quick one for me. Yes, definitely defend it. It's nice to see this storyline continuing the way it is. I like that you take the character and you start to strip away the layers of Daredevil. You take away his connection to God. This is a really important connection for him, the things that has defined his life all the way through it. I also like just a comment that after 10 episodes of Iron Fist, which we really, really enjoyed, which had a really different fighting style, I like that we have a very distinctive fighting style from Matt Murdock once again. This boxing style that he has and that he's grown up learning. I love that we get to see that completely differently in the fights. They're much more scrappy. As you said, John, they're much more like cage fights, cage boxing matches, and they should stand completely separate from Iron Fist, So nice to have that in here as well, but really intrigued by the story, really excited to see, a couple of the newer characters and what's going to happen with them, and really excited to see if Wilson Fisk is out on the streets now when we get back with our next episode. Once again, no feedback for this episode, as John mentioned earlier on. Our fellow defenders are hopefully watching the episodes and writing your feedback as we speak. If you want to send us in any feedback, just email us to feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com. Pop over to our website at defenderstvpodcast.com and leave us a voicemail of up to 90 seconds of your thoughts, or record an MP3 of your thoughts and email it to us at that email address, and we'll play it on the podcast and discuss it on future episodes.
That's it, fellow defenders. Yes, we have options for feedback, options for discussion points, options for comments. Of course, there is our Facebook group as well. Head on over there, join us if you're not already a member, and you can interact with the community, with the group, on the spoiler-filled comment posts that we put down. So if you're not at that episode, of course, don't go into
Absolutely.
it. Otherwise you will get spoiled. But please head on over and join the group over on Facebook. And of course, please subscribe and join the podcast community of Defenders TV Podcast over at the podcast catcher of your choice.
Yes. We'll be back next week with our next review of Daredevil Season 3, Episode 3. Chris will be back for that one. Looking forward to him joining us. Thanks so much, fellow defenders. Talk to you soon.
Yes, when Chris is back, we've got podcasting friends.
Yes.
Thank you, fellow defenders, for listening. As always, it is a pleasure speaking with you, and we'll be back with you again soon. Bye.